Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, May 12th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. It is going to be a pleasant day in Riverside today, with temperatures reaching a high of 78.9 degrees and dropping to a low of 58.6. It should be a beautiful time to get outside. In today's episode, we are taking a closer look at how a recent Supreme Court standard is impacting Alabama's congressional districts and changing the map. We will also examine the reasoning behind the country's largest university system deciding to move toward 3-year degree programs. On top of these reports, we have a variety of other headlines to cover as well. All of this and more is on the way, so be sure to stay tuned for the full episode of Alex's News. Good morning, everyone. We're starting today with a major political story out of Alabama, where the U.S. Supreme Court has just upended the state's congressional map just 1 week before its primary elections. To help us understand what happened and what it means, we're joined by our political reporter, Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yeah, this is one of the most consequential redistricting stories we've seen in years. On May 11th, just yesterday, the Supreme Court halted a lower court order that had required Alabama to use a congressional map with 2 majority black districts. That decision is expected to ripple through the 2026 midterms and could help Republicans expand their narrow majority in the U.S. House. It's a fast-moving situation, and the legal ground keeps shifting under everyone's feet.
So how did we get here? I remember Alabama's map being a Supreme Court issue a few years back.
That's right. According to the New York Times and the Associated Press, this fight started after the 2020 census, when Alabama drew what's called a 7-to-1 map. Black residents make up 27% of the state's population, but they were concentrated into just one district. Civil rights groups sued, and surprisingly, in the 2023 case Allen versus Milligan, the Supreme Court sided with the challengers. That ruling forced Alabama to draw a second majority black district, and that's the map that's now been thrown out.
What changed between 2023 and now?
The big shift came last month, in April of this year, with a landmark ruling called Louisiana versus Calais. J.D. Supra and the Texas Tribune have both detailed how that case rewrote the rules for Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Writing for a 6-3 majority, Justice Samuel Alito held that Section 2 only prohibits districting that's the result of intentional racial discrimination. That essentially threw out the older standard, which allowed maps to be struck down if they simply diluted minority voting power, regardless of intent.
That sounds like a pretty dramatic legal pivot. How did Alabama use it?
Almost immediately. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall filed an emergency motion arguing the court-imposed 2-district map was no longer legally necessary under the new standard. On May 9th, just 3 days ago, the Supreme Court granted that motion and lifted the injunction. That cleared the way for Alabama to revert to its 2023 map, which was drawn by the Republican-led legislature and includes only 1 majority black district. And yesterday's order locked that in.
What's the state's official justification for the map they prefer?
ABC News and the Parkersburg News and Sentinel report that Alabama officials are leaning on what they call traditional districting principles. They argue the court-ordered map sacrificed what they describe as the Gulf Coast community of interest by splitting Mobile and Baldwin counties. They also claim their map better preserves the Wiregrass region and minimizes county splits. On its face, that sounds like a pretty technical, neutral defense.
But I take it the lower courts didn't quite see it that way?
Not at all. Legal analysts at Democracy Docket point to factual findings from the original federal trials. Judges there found that Alabama's map did not actually outperform the court-ordered map on compactness or county preservation. In fact, both maps had an equal number of county splits. The lower courts called the Gulf Coast defense a, quote, false pretext, end quote, and noted the state was systematically cracking the Black Belt, a historically and culturally distinct region of black voters, into 4 separate districts to dilute their influence.
So if the lower courts found that, how does Alabama's map survive?
This is where Calais really changes the game. Under the new precedent, states can now cite partisan advantage as a valid legal defense. If a state can argue that lines were drawn to maximize one party's seats rather than out of racial animus, the map is likely to be upheld. And Attorney General Marshall didn't hide the partisan goal. He said his job was to put the legislature in position to draw a map that favors Republicans, quote, 7-0, end quote.
Wow. Now, Alabama has primaries coming up next week, right? What happens to those?
Yeah, primaries are scheduled for May 19th, just 1 week from today. According to CNN and the Alabama Daily News, Secretary of State Wes Allen has confirmed the primaries will proceed as planned. But here's the catch. Most of the results in the affected congressional districts, that's districts 1, 2, 6, and 7, are expected to be voided. So voters will cast ballots that, in many cases, won't count toward choosing a nominee.
That sounds like an administrative mess. Did the state plan for this?
They did, actually. The Alabama legislature passed House Bill 1, which Governor Kay Ivey signed on May 8th, just 4 days ago. That law gives the governor authority to invalidate primary results in the affected districts. It also requires replacement primaries under the 2023 one-district map to be held by August. And those special primaries will be decided by plurality, meaning no runoffs, which is designed to speed things up before the November general election.
Has Governor Ivey actually pulled that trigger yet?
As of this morning, no. She hasn't issued the formal proclamation to void the May 19th results, but the legal framework is fully in place and ready to activate. Most observers expect that proclamation to come quickly once the votes are tallied. So voters heading to the polls next Tuesday are essentially participating in a primary whose results may be erased within days.
Let's zoom out. How does this fit into the bigger national picture?
NPR and Bloomberg Law report this is part of a much broader mid-decade redistricting battle. Republicans are hoping to net somewhere between 9 and 14 seats nationwide through new maps in states like Texas, North Carolina, and Missouri. Alabama is essentially the leading edge of that strategy, and given how narrow the current House majority is, even a handful of seats could determine which party controls the chamber after November.
Who's most at risk in Alabama itself?
The biggest casualty is Democratic Representative Shamari figures in District 2. Under the court-ordered map, his district was competitive, with a black voting age population of nearly 49%. The reinstated 2023 map cracks that district, dropping the black voting age population to roughly 40% and turning it into what analysts call a safe Republican seat. That likely flips it back to the GOP and could clear a path for former Representative Jerry Carl, a Republican, to return to Congress.
And this isn't just an Alabama problem, is it?
No, the ruling has put other Southern Democrats on notice. In Louisiana, Representative Cleo Fields faces a similar threat directly tied to the Calais decision. And in Tennessee, Representative Steve Cohen could be displaced after the Republican-led legislature there split Memphis into 3 Republican-leaning districts. So you're seeing the same pattern repeat across multiple states, all enabled by the new legal standard.
There's also a deeper constitutional question here, isn't there?
There really is. Legal scholars interviewed by The Guardian and the Harvard Law Review describe a deepening tension between Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The Supreme Court's recent actions point toward what's called a colorblind interpretation of the Constitution. Under that view, any map that requires a specific racial percentage is treated as an unconstitutional racial quota, even when it's drawn to remedy past discrimination.
How are critics responding to that framing?
Justice Sonia Sotomayor argued in her dissent that a lower court could still find Alabama guilty of intentional discrimination under the 14th Amendment, leaving one possible legal avenue open. Outside the court, NAACP President Derek Johnson said the decision represents a, quote, return to Jim Crow, end quote. Conservative scholars counter that disentangling race from politics is necessary to prevent race from being what they call the predominant factor in districting, even if that means fewer majority-minority districts.
So as Alabama voters head to the polls next Tuesday, what's the bottom line for them?
The bottom line is uncertainty. Voters will show up on May 19th knowing that in 4 congressional districts, their primary ballots may be voided within days. The Supreme Court has, in effect, already redrawn the lines for their political future before they cast a single vote. And with special primaries due by August and the general election in November, Alabama is looking at one of the most compressed and chaotic election cycles in recent memory. The legal fights are almost certainly not over.
Fascinating and unsettling stuff. Ethan, thanks so much for breaking it all down for us this morning.
Happy to, Grace. We'll keep tracking it.
Welcome back. We've been talking education all morning, and now to a major shakeup in California higher ed. The Cal State system is rolling out something it hasn't done in more than 3 decades. Here to walk us through it is our education reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yes, this is a really significant moment for the California State University system. Last week, the Board of Trustees voted unanimously to authorize 3-year bachelor's degrees and to formally grant academic credit for work experience. The Sacramento Bee, Cal Matters, and the Sacramento Patch all reported it as the first time in over 30 years that CSU has added new types of baccalaureate degrees. And remember, this is the largest 4-year public university system in the country.
Wow. So how exactly does a 3-year bachelor's degree work in terms of the actual coursework?
It comes down to amending Title V of the California Code of Regulations. Historically, a CSU bachelor's required at least 120 semester units. According to AOL News, the new policy lowers that floor to 90 units for 3 specific new degree categories. So individual campuses can design condensed, career-focused programs that run anywhere from 90 to 119 units rather than the traditional 120.
And this is happening at a moment when CSU itself is restructuring, right?
That's right. The system has long had 23 campuses, but the trustees' decision coincides with the planned integration of Cal Maritime and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo this fall in fall 2026. That effectively moves CSU to a 22-university structure. Importantly, the policy doesn't force any campus to create these degrees. Faculty at the 22 campuses may begin developing curriculum as early as this fall, with the first degrees potentially debuting in fall 2027 or 2028.
Okay, so let's get into the new degree types. What are students actually going to see on offer?
There are 3 distinct pathways, all designed to be more nimble than a traditional BA or BS, according to Patch and AOL. First is the Bachelor of Education, or BEd, which is returning to CSU for the first time since 1982. It targets aspiring teachers and aims to address California's chronic teacher shortage by letting students earn a degree and a teaching credential simultaneously. Then there's the Bachelor of Professional Studies, aimed at working adults moving into management, modeled after programs at Syracuse University and the University of Kansas.
And the third one?
The third is the Bachelor of Applied Studies, geared toward students with vocational or technical backgrounds, things like HVAC, medical technology, or car maintenance. It creates a pathway for people who already have an Associate of Applied Science degree, similar to programs at the University of Pennsylvania. So all 3 are explicitly career-oriented, rather than the more general liberal arts framing of a typical BA.
Now, one of the most eye-catching pieces is giving students credit for work experience. How will that actually be evaluated?
This is called credit for prior learning, or corporal, and it's a central pillar of the shift. Under the new rules, students can earn units through documented work history, industry certifications, military training, and competency testing, things like portfolios or exams. The goal is to let transfer students finish a degree in just 1 year after transferring, which is 30 units post-transfer. To make that work, CSU had to overhaul several other policies as well.
What kind of policies?
Probably the biggest one is residency. The system abolished the long-standing requirement that students earn at least 30 units at the specific campus awarding the degree. Now students can aggregate units from across the CSU system. And according to reports found via Gemini Flash, the degrees are being integrated into the transfer success pathway and leveraged alongside SB 960, authored by Cabaldon. That legislation streamlines non-duplication rules between CSUs and California community colleges, enabling 2+1 articulation agreements.
2+1, meaning 2 years at a community college, then 1 at CSU?
Exactly. 60 units from a community college lead directly into a 30-unit completion year at a CSU. It's a much faster, cheaper on-ramp to a bachelor's degree, especially for working adults, and that connects directly to the economic argument driving all of this.
Right, let's talk about that. Why now?
The Sacramento Bee and Cal Matters both highlighted economic mobility as the primary driver. California is home to more than 6 million working-age adults who have a high school diploma or some college credit but no degree. And the wage gap is stark. Degree holders in the state earn roughly double the annual salary of those with only high school diplomas. That's about $96,000 versus $48,000 a year.
That's a huge gap. Is enrollment also part of the equation?
Absolutely. CSU is facing a competitive crisis. Between 2020 and 2025, 10 campuses saw double-digit % enrollment declines. By offering shorter, more affordable degrees, CSU is essentially trying to compete with for-profit and online colleges that have lured adult learners with promises of faster completion. So this is partly mission-driven and partly survival.
Now what about financial aid? Will students in these shorter programs still qualify?
They will, but with a brand new wrinkle. These 90-unit degrees qualify for federal financial aid, but they're the first generation of degrees governed by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, known as OB3, which took effect July 1, 2026. Under OB3's Student Tuition and Transparency System, or STATS, the Department of Education monitors return on investment. If a 90-unit major fails to produce graduates earning more than a typical high school graduate, the program could lose federal aid eligibility.
And loan limits? Are those affected too?
Yes. Because these programs are shorter, federal loan limits will be strictly prorated based on the 3-year timeline. That could cap a student's total borrowing eligibility. So while access is broader in some ways, the financial guardrails are tighter than they would be for a traditional 4-year program.
This sounds like a lot of change all at once. Is everyone on board?
Definitely not. The decision has faced significant pushback from the CSU Academic Senate. Senate Chairperson Elizabeth Betsy A. Boyd actually requested a pause on the vote until September, and the trustees denied it. According to Patch, faculty concerns center on brand integrity and what they're calling degree devaluation.
Degree devaluation, that's a strong term. What are they specifically worried about?
The Senate argued that any degree requiring fewer than 120 units shouldn't be called a bachelor's at all. They suggested titles like Advanced Associate Degree instead. Trustee Jack McGrory echoed those concerns, suggesting the system might be diluting the quality of the degree. There's also a debate about whether the European comparison really holds up.
Tell me more about that European piece.
Nathan Evans, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, cited European 3-year degrees as a precedent, but the Academic Senate countered that European high schools, with programs like the International Baccalaureate or the German Abitur, are far more rigorous. Those students can start specialized major work on day 1. The Senate's argument is that without that same secondary school rigor, a 90-unit U.S. degree may simply lack the necessary breadth.
And what happens after graduation? Will these degrees actually be recognized by employers and grad schools?
That's the open question as of today, May 12, 2026. Portability is the big concern. According to CAL-HR and the State Personnel Board, a conferred degree from an accredited institution generally meets the requirement for graduation from college, regardless of unit count. But for roles where applicants use equivalency in place of a degree, the 120-unit standard still applies.
What about specialized fields, like accounting or engineering?
That's where the risks really stack up. CPA licensure in California requires 150 units, so a 90-unit graduate would still be 60 units short. Similar hurdles exist for engineering under ABET standards and for medical school prerequisites. And the University of California system and other major research universities often define a bachelor's degree as a 4-year course of study, so faculty warn that 90-unit holders might be viewed as having terminal or second-tier credentials, potentially needing bridge units to enter competitive master's or PhD programs.
So is there anyone in the accreditation world giving this a green light?
Yes, despite the concerns, the regional accreditor, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, or WASC, has signaled its support. It actually recommended the specific names for the shorter bachelor's degrees to provide what officials called a legal floor of legitimacy for the new programs. Enrollment for the first cohorts is expected to begin in 2027, so we'll be watching closely to see which campuses move first and how students and employers respond.
Fascinating story, and clearly one we'll be tracking for years. Chloe, thanks so much for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The Bureau of Labor Statistics just released the April 2026 Consumer Price Index report, and it looks like the economy is feeling a bit under the weather. Annual inflation has accelerated to 3.7%, the highest temperature we have seen in over 2 years. This heated report was fueled by a massive spike in energy costs following the outbreak of war involving the United States, Israel, and Iran. While core inflation, which cuts out the volatile food and energy sectors, edged up to 2.7% due to a one-time rent adjustment, the real pain is at the pump, where gasoline prices have topped $4.50 per gallon. This surge is beginning to outpace wage gains, causing Americans to lose their grip on real purchasing power. With these hot readings, the Federal Reserve is expected to keep interest rates parked between 3.50% and 3.75% well into 2027. Acting Labor Secretary Keith Sonderling is now navigating these choppy waters after taking over the role in late April. Across the Atlantic, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is refusing to fold his tent, telling his cabinet he intends to get on with governing, despite a catastrophic showing in the local elections. His Labour Party lost over 1,100 council seats and control of 38 local authorities, while the Reform UK and Green parties picked up the slack. The political climate is getting drafty, as Junior Minister Miata Fahnbulleh resigned, urging Starmer to set a timetable for an orderly transition. Despite over 80 Labour MPs calling for him to step down after less than 2 years in power, Starmer is staying the course, even as borrowing costs climb, due to investor fears of government paralysis. Senior cabinet members like Wes Streeting and Pat McFadden have been forced to step up to the plate to defend the Prime Minister's authority. In a California courtroom, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman took the stand to face the music in a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit filed by Elon Musk. Musk claims that Altman and Greg Brockman turned their backs on the company's nonprofit roots for a lucrative partnership with Microsoft, calling it a Shakespearean betrayal of his original $38 million donation. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella did not hold back in his testimony, describing the board's previous attempt to fire Altman as amateur city. With OpenAI currently valued at $852 billion, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers has her hands full as the trial regarding the 2025 transition to a for-profit structure nears its closing arguments this Thursday, May 14th. On the health front, officials are monitoring an outbreak of Andes hantavirus aboard the cruise ship Hondius. There have been 9 total cases and 3 deaths reported among the 147 passengers and crew. But the CDC says the risk of a wider pandemic is still at low tide, since the virus requires prolonged physical contact to jump from person to person. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is at the wheel of the response, ensuring American passengers are sent to Nebraska for a 42-day quarantine period. This outbreak is a major test for the Make America Healthy Again initiative, highlighting the need for rodent control and quick isolation to keep things from spreading. Finally, the parent company of the Canvas learning system, Instructure, has made a deal with the cybercrime group Shiny Hunters to recover 3.65 terabytes of stolen data. The breach impacted 41% of United States higher education institutions and involved 275 million records, making it a lesson the company will not soon forget. CEO Steve Daly apologized for the lack of transparency during the crisis, which saw digital shred logs provided to confirm the data was destroyed. This massive breach has reignited the debate over how schools protect student information in an increasingly digital world. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.